Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to do a drawing of a house in two-point perspective. Now, before I actually get into the drawing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some simple tips that hopefully will cover some basic concepts of linear perspective that you'll be able to apply in your drawings. Now, whenever I teach linear perspective, there are always some very simple concepts that I always try to emphasize that are so simple they tend to be overlooked. For example, you have to be able to make parallel lines that are vertical, and you also have to be able to make horizontal lines that are actually perpendicular to those vertical lines. That's something that's very simple, but it can be so simple we take it for granted. Now, nothing demonstrates this better than using a simple cube or a rectangular prism, however you want to look at it. But the basic idea is that with this simple thing, we can begin to understand how linear perspective operates. Now, let's set up a horizon, all right? And we're going to pretend that we're looking at this structure in two-point perspective. So we're going to establish our two vanishing points, and we're going to make the parallel lines kind of converge to them. So we have vanishing point 1, vanishing point 2, right? All right, so let's start marking off the borders of this form. Now, let's say we're trying to draw like the ridge of a roof. A lot of times this is normally a problem because we're trying to figure out where the center is. Now, a simple thing we can do is just by using a square, right? We can actually make a cross. And what that does is it tells us where the horizontal center is and where the vertical center is. Now, this is pretty useful because the same thing applies when you draw this square in perspective. So by still drawing the cross, right, we can now find out where the new center is. And we also already have the vertical center. So now by doing this, we can now have a way of dividing things up in perspective. How do we know where the half point is of something in perspective? How do we know where the quarter point is of something in perspective? And now we can apply this to not only drawing things like that, but we can also use it. Say, for example, you have the side of a building and you want to draw a series of windows. So now we have the half point, quarter points, and we can have 3 windows, 4 windows, however many different shapes we can have or you want to place. You can, basically use the same concept, and you can do this up to infinity, and the same principle applies. And you can see how this can be used to draw trees, light poles, anything like that recedes into space. Now, going back to this, so now we make our X, right? And the X tells us, okay, where the center is, and that is the high point of the roof. And just by knowing that, all we have to do is connect it to the sides. See, because we're looking at the same principle of using the square. Now, all we have to do is find where the end of this the structure is and basically connect the 2 high points by doing the same thing to the square or that shape that's in the back. And all we're doing from here is just connecting them by following the principle of using parallel lines and perpendicular lines. See, so the edge or the top ridge of the roof is pretty much going to be parallel to the lower side. And then we basically use the same principle for the doors and windows at the front and the side. Now, the first thing I established was my horizon and then my center vertical. And then I pretty much determined the points, my high and low points. And then from these points, I basically connect them to the vanishing point. And then from here, I can basically establish the basic structure of the house. See, so from here, I'm basically focusing on the rectangular prism. That's what I have in mind. And then, it's just a matter of carving out the house, in a way that will fit the design that I have in my mind. So whether the roof is also carved out from a rectangular prism as well, just as with any other structure that I create, everything I envision is being enclosed within some form of a prism-like structure. And that, along with just drawing the X as you see I'm doing here, enables me to place things naturally as it recedes into space. So like, for example, here, all I'm doing is just making the X and determining my quarter points, half points, and then I can just, place the structure just naturally in place. And this is something, as I said, with the having that prism structure in mind, is something that makes the house, regardless of how complex it may appear, makes all of the parts of the house come naturally together so nothing looks out of place. So as I'm about to start laying over the ink, you'll notice that, for the pencil work, there's nothing in detail per se. Most of it is really just structural, so I've laid the foundation down, but I haven't gone into detail with anything because I leave that ultimately to when I start inking. And I do that deliberately also because I want to have a certain amount of freedom with the inking. I don't want to the pencil to dictate everything that I'll do with the pen. I just wanted to lay a structural foundation that I pretty much follow or go on top of. And then I'm free to kind of dictate where I want to go with the inking or the details or how I want to treat certain things. Even there's no information about light and shadow. And as you can see here, now I'm starting to lay things down. I'm determining how am I going to treat the texture of the roof as opposed to, laying in shadow, and how am I going to distinguish that? So here it's really just fun with just putting in whatever information I want to be able to give the house its character. And that's pretty much what I'm doing here. I'm testing things out and giving the house kind of like freestyling actually, and kind of saying, okay, where is the personality of this house? And that's one of the things that I love about inking, is that you can plan, but in a sense you can never plan, because it's almost like the work takes on a personality of its own whenever I get started, so I'm laying in the shadows of the roof, laying in the texture of the roof. I never planned it at all. I just kind of winged it and see, okay, I like this while I'm doing it. And then I do the same thing with the shadows, determine the type of strokes I'm going to use for the shadows. And then as I go, I'm figuring, okay, yeah, I like this. Or sometimes I even change in the drawing, because if you look really close, the texture of the roof actually changed a little bit because I changed the type of patterns that I wanted to use to capture that. And as I go forward, I'm making these decisions, and you can see the personality and the character of the house starts taking shape. Here's an interesting little point here, or a lesson, or something you can learn to apply to your work. See, one of the reasons why I like applying details slowly, or kind of like applying my inking in layers, first I do my outline, then I do a layer of shading just to test things out. One of the good reasons I do this is because you can make decisions or change your mind mid-drawing, but it won't cost you much. If you notice, to the far right of the house, I kind of laid in the what looks like a brick-like texture. I kind of didn't follow up with making more bricks as yet, because I wasn't sure I wanted to follow that. And if you notice now, I'm starting to apply this brick type of a texture to the bottom of the house. And if you look really closely, it's different from the texture I used for the end of the house at the far right. And this is because I decided mid-drawing that, no, I'm not going to use that. I'm actually going to use a different texture. And I like this one a lot better. But fortunately, I drew very lightly, and I didn't commit to it. I kind of allow myself to be a little spontaneous and change things up a bit. And as I said, if you look closely, you'll see that I made a decision. I shifted the way I treated the bricks, later on in the drawing. So this is one of the reasons why sometimes it's good to pace yourself and not commit to doing things too seriously too early, and leave yourself some room for flexibility and just to experiment and change things up if you feel like it. Even at this stage in the drawing, where you'd think you wouldn't be making any choices or changing things, but I still am, so you're still kind of course, that's the beauty about ink, is that you're the paradox where you are, to a certain extent, you have to commit, At the same time, you're given a little wiggle room based on how you pace yourself. And that's something that I try to encourage a lot of people to do is, even though you're moving along, you have to move along and you cannot go back, because I think, at the same time, you're still having a little bit of room for flexibility while you're still committing to the decisions you make. So even though in the end I added a lot of details and exterior features and structures and so on, the point is I still stuck to the basic structure of this simple shape. And eventually you build outwards. That's the key thing. That's the fundamental thing I want you to get here, is that, with linear perspective, whether you're drawing a house, whatever the structure is that you start with a fundamental shape, fundamental structure, and then you develop outwards from there. So hopefully you found this at least inspiring or helpful in some way, and you're able to take something from this that you can apply to your own work.